I'll introduce Nan. She is an expert in finding out where things go wrong and helping them go right. She is an educator, speaker, and coach. Her passion is to help people play well together. She currently speaks or teaches at University of Minnesota, St. Thomas, Center of Excellence, and Graduate School of Banking in Madison, Wisconsin. And I thought I heard others as well. So please welcome Nan, and let's hear about critical thinking and problem solving.
I know. Thank you. I just have to say it takes a lot of courage, and I appreciate you all coming here to listen to a session on critical thinking on the last day, on the last elective of a conference. I mean, seriously, if I looked at that and said critical thinking last event, I'd be like, yeah, no, I don't think so. I know. The bar was set low. We like that. We like that. Well, I just thought it was interesting, too, though, because when I saw the brochure and I'm looking at it and I'm looking at the descriptions and I'm like, oh, 2 lines. Oh, well, that doesn't tell them much. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I was hoping maybe the Google Glass would work in my favor. Anyway, we're here to learn about thinking critically, and so I'm going to make you think critically. We have to think. You actually have to think. So I have a riddle for you to get started with. I think most of you have read this. Can I go to the next slide? What's the name? Your name. Okay, because the first slide said, suppose you're a bus driver. But what did most of you start to do? You started to do math, and I can see it. It's funny because it's like I can watch the heads. Either that or I'm watching the fingers. Occasionally somebody will take their phone out and they'll start doing this, okay? But what's the problem with what just happened? You didn't know what the objective was, okay? And actually, if you were in just Stevie Ray's presentation on improv and brainstorming, one of the things he said is you always have to know what the objective is. You didn't really have a clear objective. And to think critically, we have to be clear about what our objective really is. The other part of it is it's about that data. We've been so conditioned to think that data is the all and be all and end all of everything. It's all about data and it's about big data. But I'm here to talk to you that critical thinking is more than just the data. There's more to it than that, okay? So I want to know, in your mind, how do you know if you've thought critically? Oh, your head hurts at the end of the day. Boom. Yeah, it does. Okay, how else? How else do you know you've thought critically? Okay, you've looked at different alternatives. Absolutely. Yeah, you have looked at the data. It's there for a reason. Use it. There's room up front. Please feel free. What else? Yeah, you use reflection. We'll talk about that. Thank you. Yeah, so you're thinking about the criteria. Why are you choosing something? And we're going to build on that as well. What else? Formulating questions. Good. Good. A critical thinker probably asks more questions than they share information. Okay. What else? Yeah. Yeah. You keep asking the question why. That was kind of one of the things if you're old enough to know the quality improvement. Okay. We learned that, asking the question why 5 times. I would challenge you now, though, to use other questions, what, where, when, who, how, sometimes to help us think a little differently and engage other people. Anything else? Absolutely. Other perspectives, opinions, information from other people. I would tell you that critical thinking is a team sport. Why would I say that? It's hard to do alone. Why is it hard to do alone? Yeah, you're looking at it from one perspective. And do we have a perfect vision of the world? No, we don't. We have blinders. We have perspectives. We have limitations. Our brains are all wired differently. You know, I do a lot of work with teams, and one of the things I do is I want people who think differently on my team. It feels really uncomfortable at the beginning, but the joy of it is you challenge each other and stretch each other's thinking. Okay? I'm going to give you a little different definition of critical thinking, because my definition of critical thinking was forever changed about 10 years ago. Okay? I actually grew up working as a bank regulator. I used to work for the federal government and regulated nationally chartered banks. Yes, thank you. We love bankers, yes, okay. And most bankers don't love most regulators, though, so the fact that she applauded is actually unusual. Most people are like, oh, God, the regulators are here, you know, and they run the other direction. But I grew up, it's like data and policy and information, okay? But 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with brain aneurysms. Okay? My father died at the age of 45 of a brain aneurysm. He had a brain aneurysm that ruptured unexpectedly, and it killed him. Okay? I was having migraines, and so I went into my doctor, and he was like, well, given the family history, maybe we should just get a little scan of what's going on up there. And I'm like, great, I'll have proof that it's not empty, okay? So it's like we do it, and he's like, I get the phone call, and he's like, yeah, well, you have brain aneurysms, okay? We've got 3 of them. Okay? So I met with a surgeon, one of the top surgeons in the country. We made the decision. We dealt with one of them because it was pretty easy. They clipped and coiled it, which is actually, it's really interesting. They go in through your groin and run a little coil all the way up through your heart into your brain. Okay? Kind of cool. It's only overnight and you're home the next day. It's like, wow, how's that? Okay? The other surgery, though, was for the other brain aneurysm that I have, which just sits right on my brain stem where it splits. If it ruptures, it will kill me. And so he made the decision, and we thought about it long and hard because my kids were young, and brain aneurysms, it's something that's heritable. So people, you know, if it's in the family and they rupture in the family, it's more likely to happen in your family because actually a lot of us have them and we just don't know it because there's no reason to know it because it's not an issue in your family. Ladies, though, I will tell you they're more heritable for women than they are for men. Okay? Anyway, we made the decision to do the surgery. I lined up everything at work. I bought a new mattress because I was going to be in bed for quite a while afterwards. I mean, this was months of planning. I was supposed to go into the hospital at 7 o'clock on Tuesday morning, and at 5 o'clock, it wasn't quite 5 o'clock, I get a call from my surgeon, and it's like, hi, Nan, this is, you know, Dr. blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah? I mean, this was a man who never had a conversation with me without his nurse in the room, because his people skills could be a little better. So the fact that he was calling me with nobody else on the phone shocked me, number one. But he's like, I just wanted to talk to you about surgery tomorrow. I said, okay. He said, I don't know why, but something in my gut just doesn't feel right. He says, I don't know why this feels different today than it did a couple of months ago when we were talking about this. I can't explain why it feels different. I've looked at everything. I called, you know, my friends at the Barrow Institute. I called some of my other friends. I can't articulate why. So if you want to have surgery tomorrow, we can go ahead. Because I can't give you a very good answer. So what do you think I did? I stayed home. Absolutely. Now, had it been his scheduler who called me and said, you know, his horoscope's off tomorrow, so I don't know, I might have done it. Okay? But that experience forever changed my perspective on thinking critically. Thinking critically is not just about this. It's also about this. Okay? Some of you were probably told not to trust your gut. Okay? Research is proving now that we have more connectors, if not more, as many, in our gut that connect to our brain than almost any other part of our body. That our gut really is telling us something, that there's important information that's there. But we've been conditioned that it's like data, data, and it's like, no, this is data. It's just different data. Okay? How many of you have ever had difficulty finding something on the hard drive of your laptop? Yeah. I'm sorry, but even with the search function, I'm like, okay, I know I've saved it. I thought I called it this. And it's like, I can spend an hour looking for something, and I'm just like, oh, you know, where is this? Okay? Drives me crazy. Drives me crazy that I can't find it. Well, guess what? That's what your gut is to your brain. Okay? Your gut is saying, it's there. You just haven't figured out what directory drive it's in, but there's information there that's telling you, alert, 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 or think, listen, listen, listen. Okay? That there's actually science that proves there is a correlation now. That you really should trust your gut. Okay? Because there's something in your brain that maybe you just can't articulate. And that's what he said. I just can't articulate why it's different today. But can you trust me? Yeah, I think I'll go with you on this one. Works for me. Okay? But the other part of that is he made the comment. He says, part of the reason you came in is that you have young children. He says, what I heard you say is that you are here because your family is the most important thing to you. That you want the time with your children that your father didn't have. So he was thinking critically with this and this, but he was also thinking with this. He really listened to why I was there and why I was considering the surgery. Is this important information? You know, he said one slip of the knife and you could be paralyzed. And he said, if we roll the dice, maybe you'll have good, 10 years, come back and we'll see what they've changed in procedures. He says, you're healthy, you're active. I don't know if it's the right thing. If he had just been thinking logically, he would have been, I got somebody on the schedule for 7 tomorrow that I can't replace at 5 in the afternoon. Because most people there's not usually a waiting list for brain surgery. Oh, by the way, somebody just canceled. You can come in now tomorrow morning for that surgery you were thinking about. That was an expensive business decision. That was an expensive business decision. 11 years later, I'm still here. I think it was the right business decision. When we first met, I think he was thinking with this. But as he reflected, he was thinking with this and with this. And I think we're forgetting that, guess what? To really think critically, we need to think with all three. One of the things I learned in my career is the most logical decision that nobody buys into is not a good decision. A 70% decision that people buy into and feel good about, and something in their gut says, oh, yeah, I like that. You're actually going to get some momentum. You're going to get some movement. You're going to get engagement. It's not just about this. It's not just about the big data. What's your gut telling you? But then it's figuring out how to unpack that information. And that's part of what thinking critically is. Okay, is acknowledging that information. And if you were in the Stevie Ray presentation, it's like, he made the comment, it's like putting the turd on the table. It's like you can just say, my gut says. But how many of you even feel like you can say that at work anymore? For fear of people are like, have you even thought about this? If you're like, oh, it just doesn't feel right, they'll be like, you get that eye roll, okay. I'm sorry, but I just have a very different perspective. We maybe have to articulate it differently. Maybe instead of just saying I feel, or my gut. It's like something I can't articulate why, but it doesn't feel right. It's finding different words, okay? But like they said in the other presentation, to think critically, you have to find your focus. Why are you trying to think critically? What is the objective? What are you trying to accomplish? Okay? In our case, it was very clear. The goal wasn't just to do surgery in his case. The focus was for me to have a healthy, happy, active life with my children. And so we really have to be clear about what the goal is. Not just from your perspective, but from whose perspective? Your customers, your clients, your coworkers. We all go into a meeting and into a task force or into a committee with our own goals in mind. But we have to have a shared goal and a shared perspective of what we're trying to accomplish. And this is one of the things when I work with groups, this is one of the hardest things to do. Okay, it's not uncommon that when I get brought in, it's to work with a group who's struggling on trying to accomplish or make any headway on a decision or a project. And I'll say, well, who's on the team? Okay, great. Got everybody's information, the person who hires me. I'm like, why does the team exist? And they'll tell me, and then I'll give everyone else a Post-it, and I'll say, tell me, why does the team exist? And then I'll take the Post-its, and I'll go, okay, let's see. Here's what the team lead says. Now, wait. Doesn't quite fit under the same category. Almost invariably, every time I work with a group and I ask them to complete a Post-it on what's the purpose of the team, how many times do you think any of those Post-its look the same? Almost never. Okay, how are you going to accomplish the task if you're all defining it differently? You really have to be clear. And so while it feels like wordsmithing sometimes, it's clarity. It's gaining clarity on why you're existing and what you're doing. And yes, you have to gather information, but you have to gather information from here, here, and here. And yes, you do need some big data. But it's just information. Garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so you have to be really thoughtful about your information and think about taking a little bit of a closer look. So, we are going to do a case study to see how close you really look. So you're going to have to do some work now. You're going to have to think critically at the end of the day. I'm going to ask you to read a case, and then in your groups you need to fire someone. But let me explain something first. Because we all know that probably the worst thing in life that you've ever had to do, if you've ever had to do it, is fire someone. There's nothing worse. But let me ask you a question. If somebody comes to you and says, you need to fire someone on your team, is that a problem or a decision? Yes. Is it a problem or a decision? Okay, I heard it's a decision, and I hear a both. Doesn't sound like conviction. Anybody want to say, yes, it's both?
Yes, it's both.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Okay. Yes, it is a decision. But in reality, that decision is being driven by a bigger problem. If you're thinking critically, you do not just, when somebody comes to you with a decision and just go, okay, I'll go do that. So I had a friend who had a brilliant supervisor. The supervisor was told, you got to fire somebody on your team because we're bleeding. We're losing money. And the supervisor's like, oh, I don't really want to do that. I like my people. Do I have any other options? And he's like, I don't care what you do. You just have to reduce expenses, increase revenue, figure it out. Okay? So he went to his team. And of course, there's no extra money to do anything. But he goes to his team, and the team is like, yeah, nobody wanted to leave. There was no early retirement. They actually liked each other and liked their jobs. So the supervisor said, okay, I've been given permission if we can reduce expenses and in 6 months maintain that, we can do whatever you deem the right thing to do. Okay? So the team went, they brainstormed, they came back to the supervisor and said, tell you what, we will all take a pay cut because nobody wants to leave, nobody wants to work part-time. In exchange for the pay cut, we are asking for also a more flexible schedule and some time off. So if we can produce the same level of work, we will take less pay, but we want some extra time off. They were rolling into summer. And they're like, yeah, we'll take it. Okay? What do you think would have happened if that supervisor had just fired someone? Cascading effect. Yeah, what would have been that cascading effect? What would have happened to productivity and morale? It would have tanked. And the good people probably would have been looking for a job because they're like, who's next? Hopefully not me. Okay? But what do you think happened at the end of the 6 months? Because the employee said, just give us 6 months. Give us 6 months to see if we can figure this out. What do you think happened at the end of those 6 months? Yeah, they were actually more productive. They had figured out also how to increase revenue, decrease expenses, to the point that the company actually gave them a little bonus. Didn't make up for the money that they had given up, but they had gotten some additional time off. But what do you think happened to productivity and morale on that team? Yeah, skyrocketed. Okay? They took what was thought to be a decision, the supervisor, and said, no, let's think more critically. This is a problem. What's the problem? So do you just blindly accept when somebody tells you to implement a decision, or do you ask, what's the bigger problem? If you're really thinking critically, you're trying to understand the problem to figure out how you can address that larger problem. Okay? But for the purposes today, just fire someone. So what I want you to do, is read the case study, and then with the people sitting next to you, around you, 2 or 3 people, try and see if you can come to some type of consensus as to who you will fire. Okay? So find one person on the list that you will fire, and I'm going to give you 5, 8 minutes, something like that, and then we will report out. I'm sure there's a typo. That would be me. My executive assistant isn't very effective. You know, details aren't necessarily my gift. There's a reason I'm not a bank regulator anymore. Okay, so find all the arrows, circle them, and then make sure you give it to me afterwards so that I can correct them for next time. Part of it is I change the case study every time, and so every time I do this, I change it slightly, and I must have missed that. My apologies. Once you've read it, find some people share your ideas with.
Okay.
The last one probably is the one that I'm probably most
Initially,
likely.
that's what I was looking at. I didn't know.
I know, because he's made significant improvements, but this firing isn't based necessarily on their performance. Well, I guess it is, but it's not. That's
Especially if you take them on as an intern and grow them in your program.
Right, and then it sounds like nobody has the skills she has. You need those skills, yeah. So, anybody else that we would say should be untouchable? Or
And she'll be fine. So that was my first. You know, as I was going through this, she can handle it.
Yeah, she's
right?
young, she's still. Right.
That's true.
air conditioning.
I like the technology whiz, starting up a career. They have capacities in the field. Sometimes if you give them little opportunity that you do so. But they probably go back to the
I have my top 5 here. Which one am I not getting in trouble for?
Yeah, sure, too.
Oh, you are.
You are, and especially.
No, not me.
Not
Pat
you.
is. I'm the exception. I'm the exception.
Yes. It doesn't say Phil.
Okay, that's right. There we go. I know.
I'm guessing for some of you, you were like, okay, can we just be done with this already? Some of you were like, yeah, this was an easy decision, done. Others are you, I could leave and you'd be arguing for the rest of today. I mean, I've had groups that they're just like, no, we're still talking about this. It's like, you can't stop yet, and then it's hard because people are discussing vigorously their choices, okay? So let's talk about your choices. Okay, so I'd like you to report out a little, if somebody from your group would like to. Who chose Troy? No Troy. Oh, Troy. We got a Troy back there. Okay, let's hear.
Okay. I'll by myself. My group did I'll by myself in here. I mean, I think I probably could have made an argument for any of them at any given point, but in looking at it, I thought Pat, not shocking, he struggles with change, and I think like Pat and Athea could probably mentor-mentee each other in, hey, this is what's new, and let me help you with the change, and if Pat would help Athea with what banking, like the environment. Mm-hmm. Molly, not shocking that she's a little sick if she's 3 months pregnant. So I kind of looked at that as just, that is the cost of hiring a really good salesperson, is they're going to have a life, and they're going to have a personal life, and that happens. And so if you recruited her for those things, then you just need to wait that out and see the progress. Chris doesn't really associate with others. Well, he's a single dad of 4 children. Probably he's coming in, doing his work, and going home and taking care of his family. So, and you need some of the extroverts and the introverts. Those are really social, and those that are doing the work that nobody else wants to do, which is the compliance work. And it's possible he doesn't want to do it either, so that's a whole other question to ask, if maybe we can challenge him to do something else if he's truly looking. Fox. So Fox, he's had it rough for a couple of years, it seems. The part that had me keep him is just that they've made significant improvements and they're trying. And if it was really an issue 3 months ago, we probably should have had this conversation 3 months ago and fired him then.
Okay.
So let's continue to support him in that realm. Especially if he has a gift in an area, let's focus there and challenge him in that area. Mm-hmm. So with Troy, like on paper, looks great. You know, he's definitely a fast track success and hungry to move up, but we don't know why he's going to school part-time. He keeps all of that under wraps, and I don't think in this day and age, 3 times, 3 different places in 5 years is that big of a deal. It does show that the corporate ladder is more important, and maybe he's going to school part-time to leave and isn't as dedicated.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, one person at least was honest. Some of you might have thought about Troy. So, Pat. Anybody choose Pat in their group? Who wants to tell us why Pat?
All right, so we first thought about why the firing is happening at the bank. So we just thought that maybe the bank is moving towards more online platform, reducing expenses and being more technologically savvy. So by that perspective, Athea, Molly, and Fox were valuable assets to the bank. And then Chris, I guess as the previous one said, is in compliance, and that's not a fun job to do, so we would like to keep Chris. That left us with Pat and Troy, and since our group was the one who was firing someone, Pat brought probably very highly paid. So if you have to let go and have a significant amount of saving, then she becomes an easy target, she or he becomes an easy target. And also, he could probably threaten my role. So that's why we chose Pat.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Based on the big struggle, just that everybody works the same amount of hours and you have to get rid of one person.
Correct.
Is it that you actually have to get rid of one person or you just have to get rid of one income?
This is just fodder for an activity. You're way overthinking, all of you. And of course, I'm telling you to think critically, and then I tell you not to think so critically. Okay. It's just, there's a reason for the case study. So, Athea. Okay, so I've got a group over here. This is interesting. You know, the thing is, I change this, and it's every time I do this, I get different answers from every group. So, Athea.
So I don't know if I can speak for my entire group, but after reading everybody, okay, she was my number one only because she's very educated. She hasn't necessarily expressed interest in the banking. She has a desire to move up and move on. I think she could find a job anywhere and be effective and learn, and whether it's at this bank or somewhere else.
Got it.
And last in, first out.
Oh yeah, last in, first out. So we figured it was a quantitative objective that is not related to their age, their minority, or anything else, gender.
Got it. But yet that wasn't the first thing you listed. Well, maybe talk about that. Molly. Everyone's like, not going there. Which is actually very interesting because actually when I have a really young crowd, they're just like, yeah, she's gone. Especially when none of them have kids yet. You know, if I got a lot of like early 20-year-olds, they're like, yeah, Either that or it's Pat. Get the old guy out. Right, so get him out of here. We're done. Okay, so we're down to the last 2 then. There's got to be a lot of people for Chris or Fox. So where are my Chris groups? Oh, now, wow. I was going to say, last group I did 73%. We actually had polling. 73% went for Athea.
So, yeah, our group picked Chris, but we kind of had an alternative, which we don't want to talk about our alternative. Okay, if we have to pick one, we picked Chris, and we're putting kind of our EEOC potential lawsuit hats on, and we were like, you can't just get rid of the person with a physical disability or the addiction recovery person, the immigrant, blah, blah, blah. So
anytime there's this case study, any HR people in the room are always just like, oop.
Yeah, there's no way.
There's no, they're like, this
pregnant woman, no.
Yeah.
Or the potential drug user, no. So we picked Chris primarily because if he's looking to make a change, and that's been on good authority, maybe less painful for him to find something else. But I do want to talk. We did feel like the board giving you 10 minutes to make a life-altering decision was unfair. And so our group did kind of talk a bit about negotiating for more time with the board and maybe working with our team to come up with an alternative to bring back to the board. So we did start with Chris, and then we kind of talked about an alternative.
Good critical thinking there.
So we tried to be merciful in our group.
Okay.
So.
Okay, well, I'm guessing the rest of you then. Fox, anyone? Okay. Well, not all the hands went up, though. So some of you are hedging your bet, clearly. So who wants to give me a comment on the decision for Fox? Okay, we'll take a couple. So if maybe a couple of you give a comment or two, then I'll have somebody else comment.
So one of the things that there was another member that had to leave to pick up his son, but one of the things that we said that we're glad we're not in this position. We're not HR. We don't hire and fire and all that. As we were discussing this, we were either Athea or Fox. We kind of lean more toward Fox because of the customer complaints and things like that. And as we were talking, he mentioned something about a lawsuit, and we're like, "What lawsuit? Why?" Because of the transition. What do you mean? What transition? So I guess in his mind that meant a sex change. But we had made our decision before we even knew what that meant. Okay? So that kind of irritated me more. So I'm more, I kind of, my personality, it's Fox. Not because of the sex change, but because of the threat of being sued for that. You know, that's just me. That's why I'm not in HR.
Okay, who else? Who else wants to give their opinion?
So it was very tough to pick between all of those, but then we said, okay, since we have to pick, we went with Fox for the reasons with the customer complaints and what if he goes back to what he was doing, so more risk to take. So that's why we chose. But we spent a lot of time on the first statement here, given some struggle at bank. We were trying to figure out which section had struggle. Is it compliance struggle, marketing struggle, or technology struggle? So if we would have known, then it would be easier to pick.
Correct. But having said that, when you have a committee sometimes that's making this decision, they have different people represented, and so who do you think's needs they're looking for? Their own. Anybody else have a comment? Yes.
So this is another option because this team's a mess. I'm out. I am firing myself.
Yeah, well, a lot of people want to do that, and I won't let you. You got one last comment? Oh, sure, the guy on the other opposite end of the room.
So if it came down to it and we had to fire somebody, we decided on Chris. But the reason why I was shaking my head when she said Chris was I think we found a good reason not to fire everyone on the list. So we wanted to think through that and think what our other options were. So like your example earlier, can we come back to the team and figure out what the root problem is and what we can do differently as a team to solve the board's issue?
Yeah, and we did notice that every person on here brings a very unique, desirable skill to the table, which made the decision even more untenable.
Yeah, it does. And I actually did outplacement work for a while. It's like, that's not, no, not doing that again. Because if you go to a company once that's done it's like you listen to the stories and the process. It's like, it's horrible. It's horrible. Worst thing I've ever done. Only did it for a while. Okay. Yes. One last comment?
Well, we started out saying, why don't we ask?
Oh, why don't you ask me?
Why don't we ask the group?
The group.
We have to lay someone off.
Yeah.
Is there anyone considering?
Oh, they
would
did.
anyone volunteer?
Yeah.
Or was there an option for 2 to go part-time?
And that was put out there, and none of them wanted to. So good thinking. Yeah, nice comeback. But no, actually, in reality, the team, because these aren't the real people, but this was the real life scenario of my friend explaining this whole situation is where some of this started, because it was like, dang. There is such a different, are you really, if you're being a critical thinker, it's not just a decision. What's the bigger problem and how do you deal with it? Okay, what do you think the right answer to this is? There is no right answer. Yeah, there is. Yeah, see? I love that. There is no right answer to this. It's going to depend on your criteria. Okay, my question for you, though, is how many of you, before you read the case study in your group, talked about what would be our criteria that's job-related for firing someone? Or did most of you read the case study, and I walked around the room and was looking, some of you got pens out and started underlining things. How many of you decided who you were going to fire and then got into your groups, argued for what you wanted, and then once somebody had won, because who probably won the argument and made the decision? The person who what? Spoke first, spoke the loudest, or spoke the most or longest. That's how decision making happens in most organizations and groups, okay? And we lose so many good ideas and good perspectives. But to go back to this, okay, how many of you had your criteria set before you made your decision, or how many, once you came to a conclusion as to who you selected, backed into your decision? Okay. Reason, logic, and common sense. Common sense is not so common, okay? It's true because we all look at things very differently. The tricky part is, though, really, if you had in your groups decided on what your criteria were first, this would have been a 2-minute decision. And if you were really thinking critically, you should have set your criteria first. Don't you think? Because how many of you would want to be the other next potential person to lose their job once you explained your decision as to how you made your decision? I wouldn't feel very good about that. I wouldn't feel very good supporting those arguments to a certain extent in front of the remaining employees, saying, it's not going to happen again, but this is what we did this time. And were many of your decisions based on work-related activities? I heard a lot of what? Things related to your what? Yeah, things related to your personal lives or your what? Legal, there were legal issues.
We did look at what their job functions were, what they played in their bank.
Okay.
What skill sets would be missed.
Okay, so you did look at that. Okay, you were looking at that, but I'm guessing some of you were building a whole lot of assumptions. Some of you probably can't read the little writing from there, depending on where you're sitting. But a lot of you were probably building some assumptions into that. You were building the assumptions that, well, I can't fire them because they're pregnant. Okay, but you can if they're missing for a non-pregnant issue. You know what I mean? Because some people just don't show up. But I get it. Okay, I was sick a lot when I was pregnant, so I get that. You do call in sick. But we were making some assumptions. Some of when I would hear, they're going to take a different job anyway. Well, they've got all these great skills, so they'll find something right away. Okay. Is that reasonable and fair criteria? Your own assumptions? Not really. And what are those assumptions based on? More than likely, those assumptions are based to a certain extent on your own personal values. Now, is that a bad thing? Is it a bad thing to make decisions based on some assumptions and personal values? No. I mean, that's part of what I'm here to tell you. That's not a bad thing. Where it becomes problematic, though, is when you're not transparent and you're not open and honest with the other people that you're talking to about what your criteria are. Now, I still would tell you to develop criteria first. Okay? But if we're really honest with ourselves, I mean, my undergraduate degree was in economics and, you know, everything was based on logic and theory and all of this, and I'm like, yeah, I'm skipping that. Let me just tell you, our criteria, is based on our personal biases. Our criteria are often based on our personal biases. And so anytime you develop criteria, write a questionnaire, you know, make decisions, you got to be careful not to let your values, or at least to be honest about it. Okay? Oftentimes what I would say is ask a lot more questions, number one, of the people you're working with to understand their values and their assumptions instead of, you know, hiding yours. But the criteria are so, so important. So I think just to back up a little, I'm not going to go through all of this, is just we can all look at the same data and we all take very different information from the data. We do. And that's part of thinking critically. And so you have to figure out how do you make your thinking more transparent with each other. And that means talking about the guts and the feelings and the assumptions that you're making. Okay? Because you can sit through the same meeting, read the same information, and take very different meaning from it, but unless you talk about the data that you chose and the meaning that you gave it, you're going to be talking around each other and never really fully understanding each other's perspectives. Okay? So it's really critical that you do that. So really to think critically, it takes a lot of learning to ask good questions and reflecting. Reflecting on your own assumptions and values and asking questions to understand their values and assumptions. Okay. The one thing that is probably the most important that most groups don't do, and how many of you did go to Stevie Ray's thing on brainstorming? Okay, guess what he taught you? He taught you what? The what steps for what? 8 steps for brainstorming. He was teaching you a structured process. Okay? Most groups that don't work effectively together, especially when it comes to problem solving and decision making, they don't have structured processes that they all understand and follow. And a lot of what I do with groups is actually I go in and I teach them, just like Stevie does. He teaches them how to brainstorm and how to facilitate brainstorming. I'll go in and work with them around how do we actually make the decision. Let's establish criteria. Let's use multi-voting. Let's use affinity diagrams. We use tools to make sure that everybody's voices are heard and that we can unpack our assumptions. Okay? When we think by ourselves, we don't always think as effectively. We want to think with others, and the best way to think with others is using structured processes. And the main reason for that is just to be able to better communicate, okay, what's going on. The other thing that I would just tell you, having worked with groups with problem solving and decision making, just because it's a good decision for you doesn't mean it's a good decision. It has to be a good decision for your customer and your division and the organization. At a minimum, it's got to be good for 2 of the 3. But ideally, it should be good for all 3. And if you do not think about that and you worry about what's right for you, you may not be doing the right thing for the customer or the organization. And when I think back to my surgeon, I am so grateful for him thinking beyond what was on his schedule and what was on his, required profitability, the number of surgeries that he would do, the income he would get. He thought what was the right thing. Yes, was it maybe the right thing for the company? Wasn't it? I don't know. If the surgery had gone bad, would that have been good for the hospital? Wouldn't have been good for his reputation. Wouldn't have been good for the hospital's reputation. Wouldn't have been the right thing. So hopefully, you're going to think more critically. If you really know what you're trying to focus on, you get a little better at gathering some data. You really have the courage to unpack and be honest about the values and assumptions you're making, okay? Because only then can you take that data to use a structured process to hopefully come together for a decision that people actually can buy into and feel good about? Because the best decision in the world that never gets implemented wasn't a very good decision. And I don't know how many groups I work with, that's when I'll get brought in. It's like, well, this committee made this decision and nothing happened. And it's like, well, that was a waste of a whole lot of resources. And so it's figuring out how do we make things happen and how do we make them change. So hopefully if you think critically, apply a few of these things, you'll have a little more success. So good luck with the critical thinking and making decisions and sharing your values and assumptions. So thank you for your participation.